Joining us now live from Indianapolis, he is now the second-year general manager of the Houston Texans, Nick Caserio. Nick, welcome to the program. How are you?
Thank you, Mike. Appreciate it. Long time coming. Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Yep. We'll see. Don't. You're not sure.
I can tell you're excited.
Over. You might regret this.
Early.
All right.
It's early. Yeah.
First question: what possessed you to do this?
Hey, I'm pretty open-minded and pretty flexible, so I can handle anything. But no, I mean, I think it's a good opportunity for us to kind of have a dialogue and discussion. You know, Chris and I obviously have a relationship, go back a little bit, and I know Mike, you're very well respected in the league, and you've been at this a long time and have a unique perspective. So, it's always good to have kind of an open dialogue, and I'm a pretty open-minded person, so I'm ready for anything.
You're the man. I appreciate you sitting here with us. I really do.
Thanks.
Yeah, I do too. And it's refreshing that folks understand we've got a job to do, you've got a job to do, and we all exist together under this strange NFL biosphere. So let's start with this is your chance. I know you haven't talked to anybody else today, so this is an exclusive. How is the Deshaun Watson situation going to resolve? When, where, and to which team, and when will we know what's going to happen?
Yeah, it's a fair question, Mike. Obviously, it's been going on here for a long time. I think there's really no timetable. I think whenever there's a resolution, there's going to be a resolution. I know it's kind of a simple way to look at it, but I certainly don't have a crystal ball. I think we've been pretty consistent. Going back to even last year, try to take it one day at a time. There's obviously a lot of layers and a lot of components that are associated, with this particular situation. I mean, ultimately, my responsibility and job is to do what I feel is in the best interest of the Houston Texans organization. Whatever that manifests itself as, I really don't have an answer for you at this point. So kind of take it day to day, take the information as it unfolds, and just try to make the right decision, for our club.
How close did it come to happening last year during the season, up against the trade deadline, or at any time during the season?
Yeah, I would say there was certainly dialogue at different points of the offseason, Mike. The trade deadline is kind of a finite endpoint, not only for, I would say, a player like Deshaun or other players throughout the course of the league. I'd say there's a number of players that were kind of bandied about as potentially that we're going to move, before the trade deadline. So there were dialogues and discussions about, I would say, Deshaun and other players as well. In the end, it didn't come to fruition. So then we kind of transitioned, and, once the trade deadline was over, kind of transitioned to the next phase, just kind of focus on the rest of the season, and try to make some progress as a team, understanding that once the season was over, then once we kind of flipped the page in the calendar 2022, then, kind of have maybe some open discussions and dialogue with respective teams throughout the league. So I would say that's ongoing. And kind of going back to your first question, there's not necessarily a timetable in terms of a resolution, but at some point I would expect there to be a resolution. Just don't have a definitive answer at this point.
You're detailed. I know you always have a plan. You're a tireless worker. But with all that and the Watson stuff, does it make it hard to plan for the future as a GM right now without being kind of unresolved?
No, it's a fair question. I think what you have to do is kind of create different buckets.
Yeah.
So that's kind of in one bucket,
right.
And then the running the team day to day and the team building is kind of a separate bucket.
Right.
So as we sit here today, we know where we are from a salary cap standpoint, the start of the new league year.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Yeah.
We also know how many players we have as free agents on our team, 30 some odd players.
Right.
So those are some things that are known quantities. So we have kind of an unknown quantity over here. And then we also know at this point that we have 9 draft picks. So 4 in the top 108. So in having, the third overall pick, wherever we pick in the second round, having the 2 third-round picks. So last year at this time, we were under a different set of circumstances. That was still its own separate bucket.
Yeah.
Our cap situation was a little bit different.
Right.
And we were just trying to fill out the team. Right. So I'd say we're in a little better place than where we were, I'd say, last year at this time.
Definitely got some depth on the team.
So we've kind of have a foundation in place to some degree. So I think what you have to do is kind of be able to segment and prioritize, okay, what we can control and deal with now,
right?
And then kind of have this separate bucket over here, understanding at some point there's going to be a resolution, but there's not a finite timetable to it.
Yeah, I'm going to say that's hard. I don't care. I know you're not going to say that, but damn, that's hard to organize a team that way. It is. It really is. So I give you credit for that. All right. Other thing I'm just interested in. I mean, having worked with you in New England a little bit, how everything's done there. Of course, it's precision and detail and all of that. Do you bring the whole philosophy to Houston? Is there a Nick Caserio spin on things? How does that work?
No, it's a great question. I think all of us have been given an opportunity in New England, and we were trained arguably under one of the better football people in the history of our sport.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody could argue with that from Bill's perspective. I think what we all have to do is, there's 32 buildings, there's 32 programs. You have to build it kind of in your own way and do the things that you believe in that are important to you and kind of put your own spin on it.
Right.
I'd say that's the most important thing. You have to be true to who you are, do the things that you believe in, not try to be somebody else.
Yeah.
And just be consistent day to day. And I would say philosophically, from a program building standpoint, there are things that you're certainly going to carry with you, but you're not going to just drop one program from one location and into a new building.
Yeah,
it just
sure.
doesn't work that way. There's
Right.
too many moving parts.
Right.
So you just sort of have to assess where you are, what do you have in your building, what's on your team, and then just try to systematically make the right decisions along the way. So I think that's the most important thing that all of us need to do.
Yeah.
What's been the biggest challenge for you over the past year or so in adapting to the Texans organization, bringing the things you want to bring, and recognizing what the unique requirements of that organization and its culture are?
No, it's a great question, Mike. I think the biggest thing is just learning people. So there's a lot of people in the building who I didn't have a relationship with previously or hadn't worked with previously. James Lifford was our college director, so James and I worked together, so that certainly helped. I had a relationship with Jack, obviously, from my time there in New England, but there was a lot of new people. So I think you just have to have an understanding of what's going on in the building, what has taken place in the past, what are some of the things that we can actually do incrementally to try to make some improvements, and understand that we have a pretty long runway in front of us, and we kind of have to sort of rebuild the team on a lot of different levels. So we started that process to a degree last year, Mike. I would say to a certain extent, David deserves a lot of credit for that, to kind of get us kind of going and moving in the right direction. Ultimately, at the end of the year, I had to make, a difficult decision to move on from David. And, we went through the whole hiring process here and put Lovie in that chair. So I think you can't accomplish everything overnight. So I think try to just kind of bring some stability year one, try to flatten out the cap situation, try to create a competitive environment, competitive situation, and just make sure he understands, what are the things that are important for not only the players, but the coaches and the staff members that come into the building, and that we're trying to establish a high level of performance. We certainly have a lot of work to do. We have a long runway in front of us. We're not there yet, but hopefully we've at least started moving in the right direction.
I said earlier we all have a job to do in this crazy NFL ecosystem, and since you took us to the neighborhood, let me go ahead and ask you the question, because this is something that Chris and I have struggled to understand. David Culley, 1 year, let go, and you cited philosophical differences. What were the philosophical differences that you had with David Culley after only 1 year following the hiring of David Culley?
No, it's a fair question, Mike. I would say each year, my responsibility in the role that I'm in is to oversee the football operation and try to make decisions that I think make the most sense. And as you evaluate your team, you're evaluating all aspects of your team. You're evaluating the players. You're evaluating things schematically that you're doing. You're evaluating, okay, what are some of the adjustments? What's the plan moving forward? I would say, just out of respect to everybody involved, I don't want to get into some of the granular details on that, but I think there were plenty of discussion and dialogue and opportunities to kind of hit some of those things. In the end, based on where I felt we were headed, ultimately, I felt the right decision to make was to move on from David. I would say, going back, you never enter a relationship and expect it to be a short-term type of thing. Like, that certainly wasn't the intention. That wasn't the plan. But again, at the end of the year, my responsibility is to evaluate everything, and Cal has entrusted me the responsibility and given me the authority over the entire football operation. So in the end, that was a decision that I had to make. Was it an easy decision? Absolutely not. I have a lot of respect and appreciation for the things that David did for us. But ultimately, this is a business, where you have to make some tough decisions. And sometimes the right decision and the hard decision are the same thing. So again, very appreciative for what David did for us. I'd say his leadership, his stability, his consistency throughout the course of the year. Just talking to some other folks a little bit earlier, the way the team played and performed, I'd say the effort, the toughness that they displayed on a week-to-week basis, that's a reflection of the coaching staff more than anything else. So, certainly appreciative and indebted to him for that. But, it's never easy. And ultimately, in the end, I felt that, I had to do what I felt made the most sense for our team at the time, so that's why we did what we did.
Yeah, tough decisions, certainly. Hey, you talked about it a little. Your team, you've created a little bit of a nucleus. You got some depth. I think you got some core players you like to lead the team. quarterback situation, not even talking about Deshaun Watson, Davis Mills. Talk about him a little bit. He was a pleasant surprise to me. Do you envision him being the future guy, or are we still keeping all options open right now in the evaluation process?
Yeah, I think you have to be pragmatic in your approach. Evaluate kind of what happened last year. Certainly when you look at his year specifically, it's kind of going back to what we talked about, two different buckets, right? There was the, enter the game against Cleveland, finish the game, very competitive, quick turnaround against Carolina Thursday night. Okay, then we go to Buffalo, which is as hard a place to play. Buffalo's a great team, one of the better teams in the league with a great defense. New England the next week. Okay, then Arizona. So and then had a little bit of a gap there. Ty came back against Miami, and ultimately made the decision to let Davis finish out the year. And I would say that kind of window of time or those few games kind of not playing probably helped him. And there was a certain level of comfort. I think a lot of the credit goes to David, a lot of credit goes to Pep, a lot of credit goes to Timmy Kelly for putting him in a position. And the players around him, I would say, responded favorably well. So that happened last year. So now we kind of have to say, okay, here we are March 1st, whatever it is. Okay, try to make some progress, try to build on some of the things you did last season, try to focus on having a good offseason program. And once we kind of get into OTAs, ultimately the performance on the field is going to dictate the players that are going to play, quarterback included.
Right. And I mean, so from what you're saying there, I mean, it doesn't sound like if a big free agent quarterback came about, we're open to those options too. I mean, I know you got your own quarterback issues to deal with, but are we looking to stay with him and see what he's got for the future? Do we look to draft young, or are you willing to go maybe with a veteran proven guy?
Yeah, I think you have to look at everything and just figure out what makes the most sense for your team. So, I mean, Davis is under contract here for the next however many years. Tyrod's a free agent, so we're going to have more than one quarterback on the team here at some point. So how do we get those players on a team? Who are those players? And I would say any position, if there's an opportunity to add somebody that we think has value to our team, that has an opportunity to compete and create a good situation for himself, then we'll certainly consider it.
Hey, Nick, Lovie Smith, the new head coach, and from our perspective, he kind of popped up as a finalist after there were multiple reports as to who the finalists were, and he wasn't one of them. Walk us through how you settled on Lovie Smith when you had considered some other folks for the job.
Yeah, I'd say Lovie was a good resource kind of the month of January. So from the time that we moved on from David till the end point there, we made the decision. So talked to a number of different coaches throughout the course of the league. Some are a little bit more public relative to who you interview, who you talk to. But, I probably spoke to other coaches, not necessarily in an interview type of format, but other coaches that had experience who had coached at different levels in the league. So again, when you have an hour or so conversation about a different coach, about a program, some of the things that they're doing, maybe it doesn't fall under an interview, but that process for me was about gathering information and trying to talk to as many quality people as possible. So we did that throughout the month. I did that throughout the month of January, and Lovie was a part of those discussions. Lovie had a perspective being in our building last year about our program, about the players, about some of the things that we were doing from a program standpoint, from a program building standpoint. And we were kind of having, I would say, continuous dialogue throughout. So as we worked through the process, and ultimately, as we got to the end point there, he was the candidate that I felt made the most sense for our program and some of the things that, we wanted to do and we were trying to do. So I think once we were able to get Lovie in place, then we were able to kind of put a staff in place. So we kind of have our feet on the ground right now. In the last couple of weeks, I think everybody at least is in the building, and we're kind of moving forward and kind of starting our preparation here for the 22 season.
And after you announced that Lovie Smith would be getting the job, Brian Flores' lawyers issued a statement saying that Brian didn't get the job because of the lawsuit that he's filed against the NFL and 3 teams. What's your response to their accusation?
Yeah, I would say I have a lot of respect and admiration for Brian as a person and a coach. I think Brian is one of the better coaches in our league. Ultimately, my responsibility is to do what's best for the Houston Texans organization. So that's what we did with the hiring of Lovie.
Well done. It sounded like he got Counselor Florio to answer.
No, Mike's a better attorney than I will ever be. I almost went to law school. I was going to go to law school and be a poli-sci major, but I decided not to do it. And I started finance before I got into football. So Mike's a better attorney than I would ever have been.
Okay, so. Well, you're a better GM, that's for sure. We know that. All right, we'll give you the edge there.
Depends who you ask, I'm sure.
Yeah, you're right. Maybe we'd ask Mike that sometimes. But either way, you talk about the team itself. Just on the field, like what's priority number one for you as far as I know you don't want to tell us all the answers, but just position that you go, we got to strengthen this year, this offseason.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, would you just look at our team right now?
Yeah.
We have a lot of players not under contract on the interior of the offensive line, and on the edge of the offense, at tight end, and running back. So, two or three running backs that played a fair amount last year aren't under contract. So, I would say offensively, there's some areas that we're going to have to look to address or fill. To a certain extent, the same exists on the defensive side of the ball as well. When you sign a number of players to one-year deals, and you have 31, 32 players that are free agents. So there's a lot of gaps, there's a lot of holes, but that's what we're going through right now. We've had a lot of discussions internally in our building. We've evaluated a number of players at those different spots. So it's not about how they get to our team, it's about what they do when they get into our building. But I think, to your point, we've been able to maintain some players, re-sign some players during the year, extending Burkhead, keeping guys in the building, guys like Tavier Thomas, whose role grew as the year progressed, under contract for another year, extended Tremont. So probably on the lower level of the roster, or kind of depth of the roster, but try to build that infrastructure, the middle to the bottom half, and then try to add as many top line players as we can that given the resource constraints that we may or may not have.
Right. Last thing, that was kind of a different move with all the one-year contracts. I mean, just kind of tell people, what was behind that thought process to do that.
Yeah, we knew, we didn't have a first or second round pick, so let's say draft resource and draft capital was going to be minimal. And I think a lot of it was just to try to get as many people in the building as possible that had some level of experience in that kind of 3 to 7 year window, who had some experience, who had played at a competitive level, and just try to create as much competition as possible. And then once we get through this year, I think there's a number of players that played for us last year that we're going to want to try to keep.
Want you back
right.
Now.
So you're not going to really know that until you get them in your building. I think we knew we were going to be a little bit more veteran heavy, just given, I would say, our draft capital. And we drafted 5 and then signed 6 undrafted players. So I would say maybe a little bit more of a balanced approach this year. But again, a lot of that is subject to supply and demand. So we'll kind of have to see how it goes here once we get rolling.
Nick, we appreciate you joining us very much. We look forward to talking to you again. All the best as you get ready for the 2022 season. And again, we look forward to doing this hopefully sooner rather than later. Thanks again.
Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
You're the man, Nick.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Mike.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.